Welcome back to the Mina Show featuring Lenny, the only NFL podcast. One of the hosts asked me if Drew Tranquil was sedated by a vet. That's Lenny. I'm Mina Kimes.
That was a good one.
Was it?
8 out of 10. 8 out of 10.
I've been trying to align the intros with players who are actually in the divisions that we are discussing. A little bit of a deep cut, unless you're a Chiefs fan. Is Drew Tranquil a national name? I don't know. Should
Probably
he be?
Not.
No. Steven, did you have to... That's the voice you heard is Steven Ruiz, one of the hosts of the Ringer NFL podcast. Someone who's not been on the show in a little bit of time. Did you have to shake up all of your preparation when the Jacorian Bennett trade happened?
You know, I had like 10 notes on Jacorian Bennett, but no, it didn't move me too much. I'm excited about another young Raiders cornerback. I'm not.
Ooh.
I think I've seen you talk about him too, so you might be excited about him.
We're going to talk about the Raiders today. We're going to talk about the AFC West, of course, which it is, to me, one of the more... I keep saying every division is interesting, so I should just stop trying to sell every division to you. However, you know, we have, I think, multiple playoff possibility teams here. All 4 teams could be in the playoffs. Let's start there. So that inherently makes it interesting. I want to start with the Chiefs. I haven't talked about the Chiefs in a really long time. And of course, they are the favorite in the division. We'll just dive right in. I had them really high in my top 10 offenses pod, and I've been kind of second guessing that a little bit. I want to hear your thoughts on it because there's been some news. The Rashee Rice suspension seems likely to drop at any point. Probably going to be a handful of games after his court situation is settled. Am I over? So this is the Chiefs offense, Steven, that last year was 11th in EPA per play, 7th in success rate. It was very notably not explosive, but it was efficient. First in time of possession per drive. My whole argument for the offense being a top 5 unit again really was that I thought while Rashee Rice isn't, A.J. Brown, Jamar Chase, he was pretty damn good in this offense. And I also felt like he complemented the other skill players in a way that I wouldn't say he was the missing piece, but he was certainly an important piece. So come in, just tell me, am I being too optimistic? Am I not worrying enough about the offensive line? How do you come down on this?
I think the Rice optimism is well placed because I think his production overlaps with Travis Kelce's, and that was like a big thing during their playoff run 2 years ago when he became kind of a breakout star in the postseason. And then last year you saw they put so much on Travis Kelce's plate. They had him on a pitch count in 2023. 2024, he plays like the most snaps he had in 5 years, and we saw that take a toll as the season went on. So I think just getting Rice in there will not only make their passing game better because he's a more explosive threat with the ball in his hands, but I think it makes Travis Kelce a little bit better. My concern goes back to the offensive line, which you mentioned, which is still kind of being reshuffled during training camp. I don't know if they're confident in their right tackle situation. I don't know if they're confident in their left guard situation, which I think was the issue. I know we harp on the wide receiver personnel. They don't have the guys to push the ball downfield. But I think the offensive line has been a big issue, particularly with how they have to run the football. Because this is an RPO-heavy team, the most RPO-heavy team in the NFL. And when you're doing RPO, you have to get in the gun to do it. And I think that hurts your play-action game. You're not getting under center where play-action is more effective. So I think that limited the explosiveness and the explosive potential of this offense. And maybe if they don't have to run so much RPO this year and they don't lead the league in RPO usage, I think you can maybe get back to that explosive pass game we saw 3 and 4 years ago. I'm just dubious that's going to happen with all the question marks along the offensive line.
Yeah, it was basically a smoke and mirrors offense that happened to be helmed by like the most talented quarterback we've ever seen. So I think if you had taken the Chiefs offense and thrown any other quarterback in there and we're looking at it again this year, I would say, give me a break, right? But Mahomes was able to compensate for so much of it, especially because he was so deadly on third down. All of his numbers were obviously, not all of them, but most of them were down across the board last year. Notably, of course, the explosivity, the average at the target, the lowest of his career. He actually had the highest pressure to sack rate of his career, which wasn't actually even that bad. But there were so many reps where he was just back there patting the football, waiting for someone to get open. But all of that said, he was first in the NFL in QBR on third down. And that compensated for a lot of the like Mickey Mouse nature of the offense that you're describing. So I'm not betting against him doing that again.
Yeah.
He's not one of those players where you say there's no way that this can sustain, where he can continue bailing them out on third down. And it wasn't like they were in like a lot of third and longs per se. But I do think Rice's return is so important in terms of what you're describing, because what we saw last year is not a life they can continue
No.
leading. I think that's the way I would put it. I want to go back to your point about him alleviating Kelsey. I think that's so important because I don't think Travis Kelsey is cooked, so to speak, but he's not one of the best tight ends in the NFL anymore.
Right.
I think we're comfortable saying that. He cannot be, your offense cannot flow through him the way it did at the end of that season. I think they landed on something in terms of how they were using Worthy, right? He became, from week 11 on, he became their primary target getter versus man coverage. Kelsey was the zone guy. They used him a lot they brought down the average depth of target. It was a lot of quick outs, screens, getting the ball in his hands, and it was efficient. But when they get zone, and I think working the parts of the field that Kelsey does in the middle of the field, Rice to me is the guy who steps into that role, takes some of the pressure off of the tight end, gives Mahomes more answers versus those looks.
Yeah, we saw that, like I said, in the 2023 playoff run. We definitely saw that. And I
Right.
think we had the same question marks about Kelsey throughout that season. Like, oh, is he cooked? Is he washed? And then we get to the playoffs, they kind of unlock this Rice part of the offense. And that makes Travis Kelsey a lot better. And I think we can get back to that this year. And Andy Reid has talked about getting Kelsey back on a pitch count, which I think is going to help him long term. I think it's definitely going to help when they get to the playoffs. Uh, but another part of this is, well, let me ask you this. Where did you have the Chiefs in your top 10? Was it bottom half or like close to the
No,
top
I
half?
think I had them 5.
Because I think that's reasonable because it was kind of backwards last year. They were very good, as you mentioned earlier, very good when passing was at its hardest. Like that's when Patrick Mahomes was at his best. But when passing is supposed to be at its easiest, that's when they were least efficient, which I have faith in Andy Reid kind of figuring that out and getting back to being good on first and second down. But are we at the point where with Andy where we have to question if he still got it as an offensive play caller? I think as a head coach, he's beyond reproach. And I think the way he approaches like training camp and it allows them to get off to fast starts. But like as a play caller, how does he make Patrick Mahomes' life easier?
Well, I think it's a lot of what we've been describing. I don't think he called the offense that he did because of the line or Patrick Mahomes. I think he called it because of the skill players, right?
Right.
Just and the absence of a run game, especially the run game last year. It was a lot more efficient early in the season, and then you saw it peter off a bit. And this all came to a head, of course, in the Super Bowl when they knew they couldn't run the ball. And unfortunately, they ran and they came in with their Mickey Mouse offense, and they faced the defense in the NFL perhaps best equipped to take on
Yeah.
an RPO screen heavy offense because the Eagles are tackling machines. Andy's a smart guy. I think
Mhm.
he knows he can't he can't do that again. I don't think he's lost. I think it was just a lot of it was born out of necessity. I mean, everything he did to try to get Xavier Worthy releases off the line of scrimmage, let's call it what it is, to create space for guys, knowing that he couldn't just ask them to go out and win. He, to me, had his hands tied behind his back as much as Mahomes did. To our point, I think adding Rice back definitely helps the passing attack, but the run game remains a pretty significant concern for me. I think, they didn't, this to me, when I was looking at their depth chart, we'll talk about the other side of the ball in a second. Every time I look at it, I'm bummed that they didn't add a back. Do you feel that
Yeah.
way as well? I know that they had pressing needs and obviously they had to really address the offensive line, but running it back to me with Pacheco, I understand there's many reasons why the run game wasn't that great. And I know, of course, Pacheco was obviously coming off of the injury, but I don't know why you don't take a flyer on a young back to try to add, because it was the least explosive rushing attack in football last year.
Right. That's what you need. You need some explosion in the backfield. I don't think you're going to get with that with Isaiah Pacheco. I think you're going to get I could fall forward and get you 4 yards and set you up well for second down. But even when they got to second down, they didn't really take advantage of that, like second and short. They didn't run a lot of play action. They went back to their RPO stuff and just try to get another 4 yards. But I think one of the other problems is their personnel at wide receiver and the kind of archetype they've been chasing. It seems like they've been chasing Tyreek Hill's ghost since he's left, trying to get the underside speedster to reinvigorate this passing game. But I think the problem is you don't have a ball winner on the outside. You don't have a guy who can punish you if you play cover one. And when you look at you take a step back and you look at the league and how they generate explosive pass plays, it's almost always perimeter go balls against cover one. Like something like 25% of the completions over 20 yards were go balls by an outside receiver who on the Chiefs roster over the last couple of years has been able to run those type of routes. It's been like Justin Watson has been their kind of their vertical route runner. I know they got DeAndre Hopkins last year and he kind of provided some of that, but
Yeah.
until they get one of those dudes like on the outside that you're afraid to cover one-on-one, I think these problems with the deep ball are going to persist. And I think you're at a point where it's in Mahomes' head where like every time he's being interviewed now, it seems like he's like, oh, we got to get the deep ball going. We got to get the deep ball going again. And he's blaming himself for not giving those guys opportunities. But how can you feel confident giving a 5'10" cornerback an opportunity like that on the outside? Like you just don't. You have to throw a perfect pass. So until they get that guy on the outside, I don't think we're going to see a return to that explosive offense. And that just creates so many other problems that cascade down from that, which I think ultimately affects the run game because you're not afraid, you're not deterred from loading the box up against them.
They still do face a lot of light boxes because I think even with the lack of explosivity in the pass game, defenses are still far more worried about the pass with Mahomes, right, than the run
100%.
game. To answer your question, though, like who is going to win outside? Jalen Royals, maybe? I mean, the rookie, he's got to be like the biggest receiver on the roster at 6 feet. Super, but he like the idea of him answers
Yeah.
what you're asking for. Big, fast burner, ball winner, but he's a rookie. I think we've been so spoiled with first round rookie receiver production that we've forgotten maybe how rare and unusual it is for rookies to have the kind of impact perhaps that we're hoping for. Hollywood Brown is the other player. He's undersized as well and maybe the best in the slot too, but he was brought in, I think, to win in that over 15-yard range that's been absent. Of course, he has battled injuries and we'll see what happens there. I don't know. I think what the way I would put it is, and then we should probably, before I sum things up, get to the offensive line. I don't know what the best 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is. It sounds like they think Josh Simmons, who's the rookie, could play to start at left tackle. I don't know if that scares me or excites me. It's very Chiefsy though, in a way, which so Josh Simmons, for those who don't know, who's their first draft pick this year, was a starting left tackle for Ohio State, who probably would have been drafted a lot higher if he had not gotten hurt. He was fantastic in college. He is coming off of the injury. It's happened during the college football season. But I think the thought when they drafted him was like, cool, they just paid Jalen Moore, like mid-tier, not even mid-tier money. And we've got John Taylor on the right side. We'll just wait. He's playing. And in some ways, Steven, I feel like that's very Chiefsy in that they're like, whatever, even if it looks bad the first few weeks, we're playing for January. So let's just get him in and get him reps, perhaps. Or maybe they just see at practice that he's just so much better, which is the dream outcome, I think, for Chiefs fans.
Yeah, I kind of lean towards that being the case just because there hasn't been any question marks about his position in the starting lineup. Whereas like other places along the line, outside of center and right guard, obviously, like left guard and right tackle, they just been shuffling guys in and out of there. Sua Matias played at left guard. He's played at right tackle. Jawan Taylor got some reps at left guard, which came out of nowhere, I think, last week. So they've had a couple of guys that they're shuffling around, but Simmons hasn't been one of them. They've just been like, all right, we're going to plug him. We're going to play him. And I think his tape certainly suggests that he could be one of those offensive linemen that kind of step in and are at least all right. I don't know if he's going to be a Joe Alt or Rashawn Slater from day one, but he doesn't have to be. He doesn't have to be with Patrick Mahomes back there managing the pocket and evading sacks. As long as he's not a disaster like we saw at the end of last year where they had to put Tooney at left tackle, I think they're going to be fine on that side of the line. My concern is with right tackle and left guard. And if Mahomes is getting pressure on the interior, I think that's when you see the worst of him.
100%. And this is a big part of why they did pay Trey Smith, because they understand the importance, particularly with this quarterback, of preserving the interior. I just to kind of sum things up here, the Chiefs were 8th in DVOA last year. I don't think it's crazy in a year that was like their worst year ever. I don't think it's crazy to presuppose that the return of their number one wide receiver, who I've mentioned this on a podcast, but I do want to, Rashee Rice, from the second half of his rookie season through until he got hurt, was 4th league-wide in yards per route run and 1st in yards after the catch. Dropping a receiver like that, who already they figured out how to optimize, has the chemistry with the quarterback, really fits a hole. I don't think it's crazy to have the Chiefs certainly finishing in the top 8 based on that, but of course, the offensive line could be the problem early on.
My bar for them is, am I going to be entertained watching this offense? Like the last 2 years, I can't go through this again. It should be
Look how they
fun when we watch
massacred.
Patrick Mahomes play. It shouldn't be boring. Like I don't know about you, but last year it kind of felt like a chore to watch this offense play. And I want to get back to being excited about watching Patrick Mahomes throw the football all over the
He
field.
he he didn't look like he was having
No.
fun, but he's become such a cerebral quarterback that he wouldn't force it, and sometimes, but yeah, it is small ball to say the least. All right, defensively, some changes on this side of the ball. So I didn't have them in my top 10 defense. I didn't get any grief about that. So I think this is kind of right now, to me, it looks like a slightly above average unit. I think that's probably where I'd put them. The biggest change really is at safety, I would say. The departure of Justin Reed, who's kind of been a mainstay through this dynastic run. So you've got Jaden Hicks and Brad. I mean, the Chiefs DBs, the young DBs have played so much football at this point. It's not unknown quantities. They're good players. You got Shamari Connor in there. They added Christian Fulton at corner. Up front, you've seen some defensive tackle talent walk out the door. Tershawn Wharton being a notable one. So last year, Steven, they were 12th overall. They were better against the run than the pass. Do you see this big picture as a unit trending up or down, or just kind of treading water?
I would say treading water. I think last year the trend, they were good in the first half and then they were kind of suspect in the second half, and we kind of saw the problems exploited, especially in the Super Bowl when they had to play man coverage and they had Trent McDuffie on AJ Brown, which, like, Trent McDuffie is a good player, but he's just not built to kind of deal with a wide receiver like that, especially on the outside. But they kind of got away from what made them such an exciting defense to watch in years prior when they had injuries. Like Jalen Watson going down, it was concerning how much of an effect that
Oh my
had on
God.
the defense in the second half.
What was the guy's
Uh,
name who filled in for him? He was getting
was it Shamari
wrecked.
Connor? Was
No, it was someone who played on the Nazi
no?
Johnson.
Oh, no, no, no. Yeah, yeah, that's who it was. Just he's still on the roster, and he might have to play if a cornerback goes down. But yeah, that was a concern. And then Charles Omenihu going down kind of messed with their pass rush to a staggering degree. So I'm kind of worried because I know they've made some changes, but I feel like this overall it looks like the same depth chart as it did last year. I just hope they can get back to like doing the disguise stuff, getting into their Tampa twos, their non-traditional Tampas, whatever you want to call it, where they're rotating safeties and all that after the snap. If they can get back to that, I think maybe they can get back to a level where they're playing at a top 10 clip maybe next year. And I think that's enough if the offense does take a step forward. But if we have the same issues as last year, especially in the second half, I would be very concerned about this defense. And I would be concerned, like, not that it's going to be one of the worst units in the NFL, but I think it would be in that bottom half of the middle 10, which I don't know if that's enough unless this offense just goes bonkers next year.
Yeah, I think they had a lot of holes in the secondary that Spags was like kind of plugging last season. And then
Yeah,
I think when they ran into the Eagles, they were so worried about stopping the run that they weren't able to get to some of their more unconventional fronts.
right.
Um, I, I feel like I am not. I wish they had. I wish Trent McDuffie could play nickel in this defense. He's a good
Mhm.
outside corner. He's really good. So I'm not. AJ Brown is AJ Brown, right? I just feel like when he is at nickel, that was when this defense was the best because he was
100%.
so good and such an agent of chaos and so good playing like on the ball as a blitzer, tackler. He's just such a physical corner. But I don't know if they have the depth to make that happen. Up front, I think the way I would put this is if Chris Jones takes a step back, you worry. Chris Jones was first amongst all defensive tackles in pass rush win last year. They moved him inside and outside. Outside, he went out, played on the edge for third down a decent amount. He carries to me so much of the pass rush load. Karlaftis is, I think, become they paid a good pass rusher, but outside of him, you got really very little in terms of pass rush production. That said, if Chris Jones is still Chris Jones, I think this rush is good enough. Like an elite defensive tackle and a pretty good edge is enough, especially when you have a well-coached unit. But if he's obviously getting up in the years, and if he takes a step back, then you could start to get worried, especially given the departure of the defensive tackle. I mean, Wharton was probably their third most productive rusher last year, so you start to worry a little bit.
Yeah, and he's gone now. I completely agree. He's like the foremost load bearing defensive tackle in at least the AFC. I don't. Maybe you can argue for other guys like Dexter Lawrence and Jalen Carter, but yeah, if he takes a step back, I think we're going to have some big question marks about this front. I still think we're a year or two away from that, and
Yeah.
maybe to the Chiefs'
Was
detriment at times.
first last year, crazy.
Yeah, and maybe to the Chiefs' detriment at times during the regular season. I think he like kind of paces himself, especially early on in the year, especially against the run. So I think by the time January comes along, even if he does have a down year, quote unquote, I think he'll be ready to play, and I think we'll see him kind of step up and raise his game, but as he usually does in January. I'm not at the point where I'm worried about that part of the Chiefs' offense or defense, like the interior and their ability to kind of disrupt opposing game plans. But you need a consistent source of pressure off the edge, and it can't just be Karlaftis. Like I said last year, Omenihu went down and their pressure rate went down, and he's not like some game-changing player. If he's altering your defense that much, I think that you have some personnel issues. And I think that's certainly the case with this team. It's just that the coaching is so good, the quarterback is so good, and they're so good at
But
managing games and
yeah,
playing games on their terms that I don't know if these little problems are going to matter much.
that's key because, I mentioned this when I was talking about the Chiefs offense. I mean, they were first in the NFL in time of possession per drive. They choke you out. They're not an explosive offense, but they're deeply unpleasant to deal with, is how I would describe it. And the way and then because they ground defenses on down so much, their own defense didn't have to play that much football. And I think when we talk about complementary football and looking at these teams as a whole, even if the Chiefs defense has some talent deficiencies in my mind, they're going to be in positions to get after the quarterback. I wish they had more speed. Like FAU was their first round draft pick. He's barely played. Amenahu's coming off the injury. They drafted Omar Norman Lott to add to the defensive line. Karlaftis is more of a power guy. Chris Jones is a tackle. So it feels like that they've been missing a speed element, frankly, like to help take advantage of Chris Jones commanding double teams and particularly on third down. But situationally, I feel pretty comfortable saying they're not going to be put in terrible situations as long as they can stop the run. I think that's massive for them. And I think they know that in the AFC when you go up against your Buffaloes, your Baltimores, how important it is to not let the other team dictate the flow of the game.
And I think with their front, especially, it's a matchup front to me. Like in certain matchups against like a Baltimore, against a Buffalo, who teams that put big bodies on the field and like to run the football, I think they can hang with any of those teams. But we saw it in the playoffs or in the Super Bowl, a spread run game with that much talent in Philadelphia. They got exposed, and the lack of speed, which you pointed out, like really got exposed, and they didn't look like they belonged on the same field as Philadelphia, which is crazy to say about a team that's been in the Super Bowl, 3 out of the last 4 years.
Yeah, I prefer their backers going downhill as opposed to
Exactly.
side
Yeah.
to side. It adds to the defensive line. Yeah, it's I think key for them is just going to be seeing if they can get any rush outside the two players I mentioned, and then the sort of continuity on the back end with the young DBs and the young safeties. Still a very good unit. And I think again, if the offense is what I expect, which is I had them like I said, top 5, then you're not terribly worried. Let's do the Raiders. Should we start with Jacory Bennett? No. I will say when that hit, the Raiders defense has so many holes. On one hand, I was like, I get it, but on the other hand, I was like, the corner room, holy smokes! And let's start with the offense. Offense is a lot more fun. I'm gonna read the depth chart here because I do think there's been so many changes here. We gotta revisit it. Biggest quarterback upgrade in football, Geno Smith. We'll talk about that, obviously. I specifically asked you on this pod because you were kind of the founding member of Geno Nation. I think the founding father. The receiving group, Jacoby Myers is their wide receiver 1. Sure. Trey Tucker is kind of the speed guy. Dante Thornton is a young player who he's been making a lot of camp noise. And then Jack Besh. Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer, your 2 tight ends. They also have Ian Thomas. Ashton Genty's brought in as the back, of course. Raheem Mostert behind him. The offensive line makeup is interesting because I thought Jackson Powers-Johnson was going to play center, but now they're saying he's going to play guard. He played both last year. Jordan Meredith is going to play center. All right. On a scale of 1 through 10, how surprised would you be 10 being the most surprise, 1 being the least, if this Raiders offense finished top 8 in DVOA next year?
Top 8. I think I would be a 7 out of 10, just based on my skepticism of the offensive line and the red
Yeah,
flags that were like the Jackson Powers Johnson thing is
I
really
know,
concerning. I don't know if
didn't
you've been
love
following it at all, but like when he was at center, I think they had Alex Kappa in there, and Alex Kappa was making like the line calls during practice, and then they kind of got JPJ out of there, put Jordan Meredith in there, and apparently Jordan Meredith said they came to me early in OTAs and were like, "You're playing center this year." So it sounds like Chip Kelly, Pete Carroll, whoever saw Jackson Powers Johnson kind of given the reins of the offensive line and were like, nope, this is not going to work. Maybe we should play him at guard, where he looked a little bit better last year. So I'm deeply concerned about the interior offensive line. I feel like there's a very real scenario where we have a Seahawks situation with Geno, where there are pieces that are good and you can make the case that they have a talented offense, but the interior offensive line just totally wrecks everything. But outside of that, like I know there's question marks about the wide receiver talent, but I like the young guys they brought in. I like Besh. And the tight ends with Chip Kelly. I just think Chip is going to cook. And it sounds like what we've seen in training camp, that's been the case. They've had a lot of 2 tight ends on the field, and they've been very hard to defend. Now, that might be a Raiders defense thing more so than an offensive talent thing, but I'm very excited to watch at the very least.
So let's talk about what the Seahawks. So last year, Raiders fans, if you didn't follow Seahawks closely, Geno, I think I posted this when he got traded. Over the last 3 years, has faced the highest quick pressure rate of any quarterback in football. That continued last year. The offensive line was a disaster. He was constantly under pressure, and it was constantly put in passing situations because he lived in the gun. They were empty all the time, and they couldn't run the ball. I think that's a pretty fair synopsis of the Ryan Grubb era in Seattle. Despite that, he actually was still led a pretty explosive offense, was second in on-target rate, 5th in completion percentage over expected. Geno Smith is an extremely accurate and aggressive quarterback who last year, if he had one failing, it was, I believe, taking a few too many risks out of desperation, particularly in the red zone. Feels like a good. All right. So now when you look at the Raiders, as you said, there are things that make me think his circumstances are improved. And then there are things that give me pause. Really what you described. The main thing that gives me the pause is the offensive line. This was a bad offensive line last year. It wasn't as bad in Seattle as Seattle. It's just about every metric. But you're still concerned, especially with what's going on in camp. However, I do think that the build of the offense with these tight ends and the back and blocking receivers, by the way, coupled with the play caller and his creativity in the run game, gives me hope that Geno won't be a sitting duck back there the way he was in Seattle, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be asked to play, like, to steal an analogy from basketball, be asked to play iso ball as much as he was in Seattle. I think you're going to see an environment on offense that, even if the pass protection isn't great, is going to make it very hard to pin your ears back and rush the quarterback, which was the opposite case for Seattle. And I don't think we can overstate how bad the running backs were last year in Las Vegas and how that affected the run game. Like, Amir Abdullah was the most productive back on the team, and I hadn't heard that name in like 4 years before last year. So I just think putting Genty in there, combined with Chip Kelly, combined with how he designs his offense, this is going to be the easiest Geno Smith has ever had it throughout his career. I think if you look back at his career, I don't know if he's ever had an offensive play caller or environment that has made his job easy. Like, even his breakout year in Seattle, he was still dealing with similar problems that you described earlier.
Yeah. I mean, people would say, well, he had better receivers in Seattle. That's true, I think, right? I mean, Jacoby Myers is the wide receiver one, but that's not, this is an offense that's going to live in, like, Brock Bowers is the wide receiver one in this offense. Let's be honest. And along those lines, by the way, I mean, Geno loves attacking the middle of the field. He loves a seam ball. He loves throwing to his tight ends. Over the last 3 years, throwing to tight ends in Seattle, Geno Smith has been 3rd in CPOA, 6th in success rate. And that's like Noah Fant and AJ Barner. Now he gets to throw to Brock freaking Bowers. And, I think Mike Mayer too, who, had off the field issues, being back in the fold really helps as well. I love those two tight ends together. I think, and then Genty, to me, you talked about the run game. the offensive line was not good at run blocking for sure, particularly the interior of the offensive line. But you said this. I mean, it pulled up uh, Alexander Madison was the second worst back in the entire NFL in rushing yards over. So he was generating nearly negative zero point 0.6 yards per carry below what is expected of an average back in those situations.
I feel like my rushing below expectation would be like -3. So I'm not that far off from Alexander Madison.
No, Genti's going to be obvious, and I think Genti as a pass catcher too is going to be tremendous, and he's a really good pass catcher.
Yeah.
I just think the only other concern I have is I think like the receivers are all kind of similar. I mean, I don't know how. It's interesting that they drafted Jack Besh because Myers is obviously the number one. He's a slot receiver, so I'll be curious to see how they get Besh on the field. I think you're going to see some sort of Rams type usage of the receivers. I'm interested. I mean, I've said this is my league pass offense. This is maybe one of the more interesting units in the NFL because it's such an uncharacteristic group of players. And then we should have started with this. You have a play caller in Chip Kelly. I've talked about this a little bit, who's completely different from the last time
Yeah.
he was in the NFL. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I think you can't. I think Eagles fans are probably hear the name Chip Kelly and are like, oh, they're going to be terrible. They're going to be running the same plays over and over again, and the defense is going to be able to call them out. But he did change when he went back to UCLA. I remember, this is a deep cut, but like, have you heard of the name Dante Barti? He was like on Coach Vass's podcast all the time.
Yeah.
He was a GA with Cal when Chip was in UCLA, and I remember listening to a podcast with him. He's like, they were the toughest team to defend, which sounds like a far cry. Sounds like a far cry from what you heard about from defenders playing against that Philadelphia offense. So I think the changes that Chip has made really suit themselves for today's NFL, where bigger bodies tend to. I think that's the way the league is going. You get bigger bodies out there, you force the defense to put their bigger bodies out there, and then you create 50-50 run pass situations. And I think Chip has really excelled at that, even with his UCLA teams. I know UCLA wasn't winning a bunch of games, but the offense was always well designed. So I think the infrastructure is going to be good. And as I think the ceiling is going to be dictated by how good these young receivers are. If Besh or even Thornton can just be a guy that, I don't know, 70 catches or 65 catches for 800 yards, like that could be a top 8 offense.
Yeah, you just want one of the receivers to at least allow them to threaten downfield so that defenses have to respect space and can't just come close to the line of scrimmage. I mean, obviously Bowers is a downfield threat as well, but Geno, has a big armed quarterback. Like it's a waste if you have somebody who can't get open down there. And they do have players. I think the consistency is going to be the question. My feeling is if this is an average to even like a top 20 offensive line, given what Geno has dealt with in Seattle, I think you feel okay. But there's a chance it's not. That's what I want to like leave. And I know the comments are going to be like, oh, you're already pre-making excuses for Geno Smith. You're damn right I am. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just hopeful that it looks better than it did at the end in Seattle. He's obviously got to cut down on the interceptions.
And we should all be rooting for Geno Smith to thrive. He's one of the more fun quarterbacks to watch. He's, like you said, he's a big game hunter. He's not going to just check it down for the sake of checking it down. But I do think having a guy like Bowers out there as an outlet, maybe he cuts down on those tight window throws a little bit because he's a little more confident in those plays going for 5 or 10 yards rather than 2 or 3 yards.
Do you know who's coaching the Raiders offensive line?
I do not.
It's Pete Carroll's son.
Oh, I didn't know that actually.
Who has never coached offensive line in the NFL.
He'll be fine. Don't worry about it.
He was an offensive line coach in college though, at Arizona and Washington. Okay. My enthusiasm for the Raiders is mostly centered on the offense. I love this defense, man. Last year, it's funny, they weren't actually that. And my memory of them as being really bad, but they were 19th in pass DVOA, 18th in rush DVOA. They were the second most injured defense in football. So we should probably, that's obviously significant. They had no Christian Wilkins. Max Crosby missed a few games. They still have no Christian Wilkins because he's gone in a story that I have nothing to say about because I don't understand it at all. So they added a few capable veterans. So they brought back Malcolm Kuntz, who also lost last year, who looked really, really promising the year before. Who knows what you're getting out of Tyree Wilson? Honestly, was their 7th overall draft pick. But yeah, that was kind of the major thing. Linebacking, Spillane is gone. It's Landon Roberts and Devin White. Corners, Jacorian Bennett now is gone. You're looking at Darian Porter, who was the gigantic corner they drafted this year. DeCamarion Richardson, who's a very interesting player. Eric Stokes, Darnay Holmes, and then at safety, Jeremy Chin and Isaiah Polumau. Okay. Let's start with the good thing. You said you wanted to talk about one of the young corners.
No, I think Darian Porter, he's already getting first team reps. And if you knew about Porter before the draft, he was seen as a project. I think he only played like 9 games at Iowa State. At
the receiver turned corner, yeah.
So naturally, we're getting the Richard Sherman comps. Pete Carroll's there. He's gigantic. He can do the press bail stuff and he can track the ball. But the fact that we've seen a lot of Richard Sherman imitators, and they usually take a very long time to even get into the lineup. The fact that he's in the lineup already, 1-2 weeks into camp, is a green flag for me. But I think if I want to pitch some optimism for this defense, because I think you just read the depth chart and it's easy to be like, all right, that sounds like a bottom 10 unit. But one of the problems with them last year wasn't necessarily the scheme. Yeah. It was the fact that they couldn't tackle. They couldn't tackle and end plays and bring ball carriers down to the turf. And I think bringing in a Landon Roberts is not going to help you coverage-wise. Jermaine Pratt's not going to help you coverage-wise. But they are able to bring ball carriers down, and I think that will create dividends for this defense as a whole.
I think that the run defense, provided they don't run at Darian Porter, Tariq Woolen is the better comp, not Richard Sherman. He really, I watched his college tape, did remind me a lot of Tariq Woolen, and I think Pete Carroll's probably got that in his mind. I think that they did add a lot of players who I think will help in tackling and run defense. So Max Crosby remains one of the best run defending edges in the league. I think I should have added. So I think they added Thomas Booker from the Eagles. That was the other side of the trade, who I have zero opinions about, but he's a defensive tackle. Adam Butler, I think, is solid run defender. Landon Roberts, he can defend the run. He can tackle. And then Jeremy Chin, playing close to the line of scrimmage, is a very good run defender in my mind. So I think that there will be some improvement in that regard. And I think, like, the pass rush, if Kuntz is anything like he was before getting hurt, you can help out Max Crosby, who was probably one of the most doubled, 5th amongst edges in double team rate last year. He was still 10th in pass rush win. He was, he's still a very good player. But I think if he has a little bit of help on that line of scrimmage, whether it's Kuntz, whether it's getting more out of Wilson, that helps in that regard. The coverage situation is very concerning for me looking at this group of DBs.
It's rough, especially if they blitz as much as they did last year on third down. And with I know Christian Wilkins, I think he only played like a handful of games last year. So it's a loss, but it's not a loss they haven't dealt with already. But in order to get the most out of this defense, I think they're going to have to, 1, stop the run on first down. 2, get a consistent pass rush, which I think relies on Kuntz. Max Crosby's going to do his thing, but he's going to get doubled. But if Kuntz can get 8, 9, 10 sacks, I think this could be, I think they can repeat the results of last year, but just they were better in the second half than they were in the first half. If they could just be the second half defense they were last year, I think that's enough if our optimism for the offense is well placed.
Yeah, I mean, the offense last year was so god-awful, too. They were constantly saddled with horrible field position. So, we talked about the Chiefs defense benefiting from just looking at this from a complimentary football standpoint. I think if they were inside the top 20 with the worst offense in football, not losing many significant contributors, I think it's realistic for them to at least finish around where they did last year. And if the offense takes a big leap, you're looking at a feisty team. I mean, I also wanted to add, they added JJ Peggs, who was the gigantic Mississippi State, was it? Or was it Ole Miss?
It was one of the Mississippi schools.
I think it was Ole Miss, because I remember watching, I think, Jackson Dart and being like, who is that? Every time they would put him on the field for
running back or fullback or whatever. Yeah.
Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly are going to do that too. To me, the optimistic case for this team is like a borderline top 10 offense with an average defense, I think, which would be a pretty significant improvement from last year. And also just the general feeling that it's Pete Carroll and Tom Brady and there's a steady hand guiding the ship, which I do believe. And we haven't even talked about that. Like, I talked about the quarterback upgrade. I mean, when was the last time Pete Carroll lost more than, or, won fewer than 9 games? Doesn't that, so massive coaching upgrade as well.
Yeah, I think you can make the argument this is a top 10 coaching staff. I think we still need to see act 2 of Chip Kelly before locking that
Yeah.
in. But there is a very good possibility that at the end of the year, we're like, this is one of the best staffs in the NFL, maybe a top 5 staff.
Geno Smith redemption season.
It's coming. It's coming. First playoff win. No, I'm not going that far. But if they were in any other division, I would feel comfortable locking them in as like a 10-win team. But in this division, I think it's going to be very tough.
All right, let's take a quick break, come back, and talk about the other 2 teams in the division, both of which made the playoffs last year. All right, we are back. Let's talk Broncos. Let's finish with the Chargers. I've been doing offense first. Let's go defense first here, because I had the Broncos as my top defense in football. For me, that was based, obviously they were outstanding last year in almost every single metric possible. But for me, a lot of that was just looking at, the depth chart to me is so stacked. There's so talented at every level. I think you could argue this is the best secondary in football. The pass rush was one of the best in the NFL. They addressed their holes. So I got a little pushback on that, and that's what I want to discuss with you first. Folks pointed out that they beat up on bad offenses and they lost to some good offenses. So their average opponent was 20th in DVOA last year, which isn't the easiest, but it's obviously not that hard. So I looked up their worst games. Well, first, okay, before we get into that, I want to hear what you think about that sort of rebuttal, that this defense, this incredible top 3 by whatever way you want to slice it, defense was beating up on bad teams. Do you think that there's truth to that?
I think there is truth, but that was the schedule that was put in front of them. I think when you look at this team on paper and you look at the additions to it, I'm right there with you with the optimism. I don't know if I would go number 1, but I would certainly go top 3 with them. And there isn't a split you can find that suggests they were fraudulent last year. And I think usually it's the fraudulent defenses that get exposed by good offenses, particularly good quarterbacks. I think they were a little bit over reliant on the aggressive nature of their defense, especially on first down. They had to win first down. And if they didn't win first down, things got a little murky after there. And that was harder against the good teams, especially Baltimore, especially Buffalo. But I don't see why they can't be better, even better on first down. I think that was the one split where they were closer to league average than they were to the top of the league. But I think that's the easiest place to improve for them this year, given the personnel additions.
So you mentioned Baltimore and Buffalo. So the 4 worst games of the season they had in EPA per play were, unsurprisingly, Baltimore and Buffalo were like 2 of the best defenses in football. The Chargers and the Bengals. And we remember those games, which is I found interesting because you hear Baltimore, Buffalo, and you're like, ooh, is it the run defense? But the Chargers and the Bengals were beating them through the air pretty bad. I went back and looked at the NGS game logs to see who, like, kind of what happened or what went wrong for them in those games. And one thing that really jumped out is offenses were very opportunistic about attacking whoever was the weakest link on the field, which is always the case when you have Patrick Surtain. They're not going to throw out Patrick Surtain. They're going to throw out someone else. But I looked at the defenders who gave up the most, which is an imperfect stat, I will say, an imperfect metric, but it's a pretty good barometer for what's going on. So the Bengals, it was Riley Moss, who was coming off of the injury and was a real problem coming off of the injury. The Chargers, according to NGS, was one of their linebackers, unsurprisingly, Justin Strnad. This was a major weakness for them. In the Bills game, it was PJ Locke, safety. And then the Ravens, it was a backup safety named Devin Key. And then Jaquan McMillan also gave up pretty significant yardage. So the Broncos addressed all of that, right? Like, those are, I feel like when you look at that, what comes across to me is, aside from Moss, who was still a starting corner and who I thought was good when he was healthy, they self-scouted. They addressed the safety position, the linebacker position. They drafted Jahdae Barron at nickel. So I feel like, yes, there is some, yes, they got their butts kicked a little bit by really, really dominant offenses, but I think they addressed the biggest problems that led to those losses.
And I think those additions were like organic additions. They like fit the
Yeah,
identity of this defense, and they add to the identity of the defense. They're not round pegs in a square hole coming in. Like Drake Greenlaw very much fits the personality of this front seven. Hufanga might as well be a front seven guy with how he attacks the line of scrimmage. And then Jade Barron, I think, is the perfect nickel for this team. I wonder if they're going to use him outside when they are worried about the Riley Moss matchup. But to your point, Riley Moss didn't become a target for opposing offenses until after the injury, until later in
yeah.
the year. I think he was targeted 14 times in that Bengals game, which is very ridiculous. But he was targeted the most out of any corner in single coverage last year. And I think that's more of a product of Pat Surtain
Forward.
being on the other side,
Yeah.
not Riley Moss. So if you do see him take a step forward, which I think is very possible given what we saw from him early in the season, this defense could be even better than it was last year. I get the question marks, and I get a Vance Joseph defense is always going to be volatile, and you don't know what to expect week to week. But this is the best defense I think he's ever had in terms of personnel, and it fits his style of defense perfectly. I wouldn't be surprised if they finished top of the league in EPA allowed or whatever metric you want to use. And I would be very surprised if they finished outside the top 5 or top 10.
I think first of all, there's a lot to discuss. The scary story you would I think the other than like the play they didn't play anyone argument just talking about there. The other thing that maybe Broncos fans could be concerned about is that they follow the same path of like the Cleveland Browns defense the year after
Yeah.
they were the number one, and then they fell back to earth under Jim Schwartz, just because stylistically there's some similarities. They're a little bit different. The Browns defense I would describe as more simplistic. Like they were just like, we're going to rush 4 and play cover 1. Broncos defense played a ton of cover run, but mixed it up a little bit more on the back end. And I think they get to their pressures in different ways. Okay. The Browns defense fell back to earth in part because they were playing with the worst offense in football. Whatever we're going to get out by the Broncos offense, whatever you think, this is far from that. We're going to talk. I'm way more optimistic. So they're not going to be saddled with that. But I also would say I think they're more they're substantive, right? Like this is not just a defense with like Myles Garrett and corners who can man up. They have guys who are good against the run, really good defensive tackles, nice combination of power and speed up front. Like this is a really well-built unit. And they're all of which is to say, I don't think there's any like you said, fraudulence to this build. Like you look at the group. I mean, Jonathan Franklin Myers was so good last year.
Mhm.
Is he like one of the best players that nobody in the NFL talks about? I know Zach Allen just got paid, but I was just looking at this group. I was like, oh my God. Like, I can't believe they traded for him. He was fantastic in this defense.
I think, yeah, the comparison to the Browns, I do think makes sense from like a 30,000 foot view. But like you said, the Browns suffered injuries that next year, and that really altered the way
Yes.
they could play, especially because they're such a man dependent team. I think this team could still play man, even if they lost the cornerback, not Patrick Surtain. I think that would alter the defense. It would alter any team's defense just because of how they rush the passer. It's not reliant, like you said, on a 4-man rush. And they attack you. I thought the Browns defense 2 years ago was an attacking defense because of how the defensive line played. But the whole identity for Denver is attacking the line of scrimmage and winning on first down and getting you in uncomfortable situations where we see in the stats that it's the hardest to pass. So as long as they can win on first down, I think we're going to see a repeat of last year's success on second and third down.
Yeah, my only concern, I think, is just Dre Greenlaw, and
Yeah.
for coming off of the injury, we didn't see him that much because they're not a deep linebacking group. That would be the one area of this defense, but otherwise, I feel really good about them. And I feel good about the offense. Okay, so like I said this is just radically different from the Browns offense, of course. Last year, they were 15th in pass DVOA and 24th in rushing DVOA. They made, similarly to the defense, I think what I would describe as opportunistic and necessary additions. This was one of the best offensive lines in football. It was maybe the best offensive line in football by ESPN metrics. Nothing to do there. Tight end was glaring need. You go out, add Evan Ingram, drafted RJ Harvey in the second round, signed J.K. Dobbins. Receiving group is pretty similar, however, and some might have argued that was a need. Do you feel like, we'll get to Bo Nix in a second, but do you feel like the players that they've added to this offense make it notably better, or do you think that they didn't add sufficient needle movers?
I think it's tough to say just because two of them are rookies, like Pat Bryant becoming
Pat
a
Bryant.
guy, a starter, I think is going to be a big deal. I know Sean Payton threw out a Michael Thomas comp, but I don't know if I'm accepting Sean Payton's comps after he threw Taysom Hill a Steve Young comp. I don't know if I can take him seriously, but like you look at his measurables, I know he didn't run the fastest 40. I think he was like in the 4.6, but he had like a very fast 10-yard split. And the guy can move. Like the guy is a big guy who can win contested catch situations, but also get open as a route runner. So I'm kind of bullish on him. And then RJ Harvey, he's going to be better than what they had at running back. And he's going to be able
Yeah.
to take advantage of what was perhaps the best run blocking offensive line in the league last year. I know there was some other teams that can stake claim to that, but the running backs just left so much meat on the bone. And I think some of the underneath targets left so much meat on the bone in terms of like check down and production after the catch that if some of these guys can come in, like Evan Ingram, I think will be a big boon to those check down numbers because Bo Nix throws a lot of check downs, which can be a good thing unless you're, losing yardage on them. But I think Evan Ingram will help there. I think RJ Harvey will help there. So there was a lot of meat left on the bone for this offense. And I think they have the personnel to kind of take advantage of that this year. And maybe I think we'll widely look at this offensive line as one of the better units in the league.
Do you know off the top of your head which tight end was the most productive in the Broncos offense last year?
Was
Who
it
led
Adam
the tight
Trautman?
end? No, it wasn't. It was Lucas Krull.
Oh, I didn't know that.
19 catches.
Yeah, they barely got anything out of their tight
That's
ends.
my point is, yeah, like it was just like whatever you think of Evan Ingram, and I would say he's solidly a top 10 tight end. That's a massive upgrade for them. Back, I think. I'll be interested in seeing how they end up splitting things between Dobbins and RJ Harvey. Probably there's a lot of that's going to go into that in terms of how Peyton feels about them and pass protection. But Harvey has a ton of juice. Dobbins, I think he's okay, coming off of the injury. We'll see. But I do feel like they are not only do they address their biggest weaknesses, they added players. You talked about this who are a good fit for what they want to do with Bo Nix. And I think if I had to, give like an overarching thesis of the Broncos offense, that's why I feel pretty good about it. I think that Sean Payton has a very, very deep understanding of how to optimize this quarterback. And I know that sounds like I'm damning him with faint praise. I
Yeah,
swear I'm not, Broncos fans. I just think he's not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. And there are things that Bo Nix is good at that I think Peyton, especially as the year went on, will continue to lean into. He's a good RPO quarterback. You'll want to use a lot of play action. He was third in designed rollouts last year. He is comfortable throwing on the run. We saw this in college as well. He is athletic. That's a part of the offense too. But it was a pretty weak skill group last year. I think, once they figured out how to kind of unlock Marvin Mims, that really helped a lot. In addition to obviously Sutton's still good. So I feel like if last year this passing attack was average, which is exactly where they fell, year two, better players, even better understanding of the quarterback, there's no reason why it can't take another jump.
Yeah, and I think he has some very clear areas of improvement that I think are attainable. Like, I'm not going to be like, oh, he's going to turn around his pocket presence and become Joe Burrow in 1 year. But maybe if he creates more big plays when he does get outside the pocket, I know he created a lot with, designed rollouts. But when he got into the scramble drill, he didn't have a single big time throw the whole entire season, according to PFF. And I think
Yeah,
if he can add that to his game and become a dangerous playmaker out of structure, I think that just, adds another layer to the offense. I think if he's more judicial with when he checks the ball down and when he bails out of the pocket, I think that adds another layer to the offense. And now you're talking about a fringe top 10 offense with a top 5 defense. And to me, that's a playoff contender and a team that's very capable of winning 1 or 2 games in the playoffs.
two things I'd really like to see him improve at this year. One of which you mentioned, which is when he breaks the pocket, like to see a passing game because he was third league wide in quarterback scrambles, which is crazy. But he was 33rd in on target rate when he threw while scrambling, 25th in passer rating. So that you want to. I'm not saying he has to be Patrick Mahomes slinging it 50 yards downfield to I guess Troy Franklin, Devon Bailey. I don't know. I just want to see like some intermediate place coming off of that.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, and I think he can absolutely improve upon this in year 2, because we've seen a lot with young quarterbacks, the blitz. Bo Nix in the second half of the season improved in a lot of metrics, throwing downfield. He was much better at, I thought, because when they did drop shot plays for them, he hit a few pretty big ones. And then the rushing, I thought, as well. But the blitz numbers actually got worse in the second half of the season. I think his defenses kind of keyed in on that a bit. So that was something, I think that's something you want to see Sean Payton really work at him for year 2. And he will. I think Sean Payton's going to give him answers. I think, like you said, Evan Ingram and RJ Harvey in space are much better than Lucas Krull and Javonte Williams throwing the catch of the football. So, if Peyton can give him answers, and I think those skill players who are improved can do more with the ball in your hands, you feel pretty good about the trajectory of this offense.
So what are you thinking for, in terms of floor and ceiling for their win total?
Well, we're going to do rankings at the end.
Okay, so we'll wait on that.
But absolutely a playoff team. I'll say that. I view this. I mean, this is the best defense in the NFL. Where do you, before we move on defensively, I had them 1. I went Denver, Houston, Baltimore, Philadelphia were my top 4.
I think I would put Houston first, but I think I would put Denver second.
There you go. They're so talented, guys. This secondary is so good. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's not to like with this defense. I'm pushing back against the pushback I got. All right. The Los Angeles Chargers, the final team. Let's go offense first with this one. Did you watch the Hall of Fame game, by the way?
I did not. I'm sorry. I was not watching that. I saw the Trey Lance clips.
Trey Lance redemption season.
Yeah.
He might be QB2, which could matter at some point in this offense. But of course, for now, the QB is Justin Herbert. Receiving group, Ladd McConkey, Trey Harris, Quentin Johnson, with Jalen Reagor and Keandre Lambert-Smith, who was also good in the Hall of Fame game, by the way, who's a guy that is getting a lot of camp hype. The tight ends, Will Disley, Tyler Conklin. Backs, Omarion Hampton, and I guess Najee Harris. Don't really know what's going on there. Offensive line is mostly the same with Mekhi Becton in the fold, although he is hurt. Don't love that.
No. That's going to be a problem.
That's going to be a problem.
And Zion Johnson apparently didn't take to center too well, and they put Bradley Bozeman there, and Zion Johnson's back at left guard now. So that's it's similar to the situation with the Raiders and JPJ, where that's a big red flag to me as well.
Did you know that Justin Herbert, who was bad in the playoff game, was pressured on 50% of dropbacks against the Houston Texans, who we just talked about? Unbelievable pass rush. But 50%! He had the highest quick pressure rate in that game of any quarterback in any playoff game.
He was bad, but I don't think he was historically bad, which the interception numbers in particular suggest. We could explain away 3 of the 4 interceptions very easily.
He was in hell.
He was in hell, in which that brings out the worst of a quarterback. And my thing with the Justin Herbert playoff game, I'm not denying that he played poorly and that it was very embarrassing for a guy like me who has a lot of Justin Herbert stock. But my question is, what's your takeaway from that game? That he's turnover prone? Because the guy just came off the best interception prevention season we may have ever seen in the NFL.
Yeah, I think it's because the Chargers gave up the big lead in the last time he was in the playoffs, which that game, I don't think he played bad, to be honest. This game he played bad, but I guess it's all about, the resume for folks. But we'll talk about Herbert in a second. I think I wanted to start with the offensive line because my optimism for the Chargers centers entirely on an improved interior offensive line, because I think it was underappreciated how big of an issue it was as the season went on, and then it came to a real head in the playoffs. And this was a team that was not good at running the football. They were 8th in pass DVOA, 21st in rush DVOA. And to Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh's credit, they didn't force the issue. They realized they were bad at running the football, and so they stopped running the football as the year went on. And then this offseason, they said, never again. Go out, get Omarion Hampton, get Najee Harris, get Mekhi Becton. But if Becton is injured and the offensive line isn't better, you worry about how improved it'll actually be, even though I'm very excited about Ryan Hampton in this offense.
Yeah, the one thing I will say is if there's a quarterback that can deal with interior pressure, it's Justin Herbert. I think he doesn't get nearly enough credit for making this offensive line look way better than it's actually been when you watch it over the last 4 years or however long he's been in the league. But it's the run game that I feel like, yes, I will give Greg Roman credit for changing things up over the second half, but you look at the roster and this is still very much a team that's built to be a run first unit. And if they're not, and they don't have the personnel to support a pass first offense, I think we're going to be in the same boat as last year, where the first good defense they come across, especially one that can generate a pass rush like Houston, is going to give them a lot of problems and put Justin Herbert in hell. And he's going to rely on this wide receiver core, which I think looks better on paper. Hopefully, if Trey Harris is what they want him to be, the second round pick, it seems like they're treading water. I don't see them improving. I feel like Denver, I could make an easy case for Denver being a much better team than they were last year. I cannot do the same for the Chargers.
The team or the offense? Clarify.
The offense. And honestly, if you take a step back, the entire team.
See, I think I'm more optimistic about the Chargers offense improving, and I'm pessimistic about the Chargers defense regressing personally.
Okay.
But I think that optimism comes from the fact that they were just so bad at running the football. I mean, they're 29th in rushing success rate last year. 29th.
That was an improvement on years prior, by the way, because they were one of the worst.
Yeah, this was my favorite, like, bar do you actually watch the games team, because by the end of the season people were like still like, here comes the dominant Chargers run game and Jim Harbaugh, and I was like, you guys are not watching this team. They can't run the football at all.
They had those like 2 explosive J.K. Dobbins runs in the first 2 weeks, and that paced the entire production 100%, for the run game.
100%. So to go back to what I was saying, I do think there'll be some improvement, because Omari Hampton is massive upgrade to me. I mean, that dude is, good Lord, he's impressive. I think he's going to be a really complete back for them too. I think they'll use him as an outlet, as a pass catcher too. And I do like Trey Harris, but he's a rookie. Like, he is a rookie, and he also hit the profile of rookie that he is, which is the big ball winner, has very mixed record early on in the NFL. We've seen that, your Keon Coleman types. I just think Lab McConkey is so damn good that if they can get anything out of the rest of the group, I think they'll be fine.
I was
going to say, yeah, can we talk about him? I just love him so much.
He's the first ever white slot receiver that I think is very underrated. Like, I think he gets put in the same bucket as those guys, but like, you watch him play and he's not one of those guys. Like, he obviously can get open and he's a reliable possession guy if he wants to be, but this guy can run away from defensive backs and make plays. We saw that a bunch of times.
4th in yards per route run versus man coverage. Do you know how insane that is? And to your point, a lot of it was, I've talked about this, but Roman would put him in these bunches, in these condensed formations, create a bunch of traffic, and he would just run away because he was a lot faster than he was given credit for.
Yeah.
I think he's so good. I think he's so complete. But he is at his best in the slot. And so ideally, Harris, like on paper, Harris and maybe Keandre Lambert-Smith too, who's a bigger, fast guy, would be. Quentin Johnson on paper is the kind of player you want with him. But yeah, I'm not doing that.
His hands are made out of paper, apparently. I don't know.
Paper? Trey Harris doesn't have Johnson's separation ability, but he has significantly better contested catch hand. And so, he could also help them in the red zone, which is where things really ground down to a halt. Herbert was 5th in QBR outside of the red zone, 27th inside of it. I once again am asking him to run more, to scramble. That was crazy to me in the Texans game that he didn't have a single scramble. If I had to lobby, like one, that's what I would criticize Justin Herbert for.
Yeah.
It doesn't get it. It's the lack of scrambling, because he's athletic, but he doesn't do it.
I think we've seen his scramble rate kind of tick up like every year, but I do agree that he's leaving a lot of meat on the bone there. And like, you could raise it. He could probably double his scramble rate, honestly. And it would just put so much more pressure on the defense, but it's tough when you play in a Greg Roman offense. And we saw this when Lamar Jackson was there. You're putting a great athlete who would be very dangerous in space in the most condensed situations, in the most condensed
Yes.
offense possible. It just cramps everything. And I think that's why you saw problems in the red zone. And I think the lack of detail in the route running, the route concepts is another big reason why the red zone struggles happened. And we saw that in Baltimore. That's my pause with Greg Roman, is that every single stop he's had, the problems have been the
Hits a
exact
wall.
same. Yes.
Yeah.
And he's needed a great offensive line, especially on the interior, to get the most out of his run game. And they just don't have that. And now you're putting Scott Matlock on the field. And he's like, honestly, just let Scott Matlock play defensive tackle, because I think he's a much better defensive tackle than he is a fullback. But I guess he wants to do the Patrick Ricard thing all over again. I don't know.
They could use him in this defense. Which we'll get to in a second. Defensive tackle. Yeah, I kind of joked when Roman was hired that I would give it 2 years before the fan base started agitating and turning on him. I think if this offense doesn't take a leap this year in terms of the run game, you probably see that midseason. Much hinges on Mekhi Becton being healthy, in my opinion. Before we move on to the defense, I do have to ask, if Justin Herbert and Geno Smith were both dangling off of a cliff and all of film Twitter, or whatever you want to call it, the NFL nerds had to save one guy, who do you think they would save?
I think film nerds as a whole would save Justin Herbert. Me personally, I would save Geno, my Lord and Savior. But also because I feel like Justin Herbert could just save himself. I mean, the man's Superman. He can handle it. He's played behind this offensive line for 4 years and has come out just fine.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing with the scrambles, and he's been hurt. I mean, he had a high ankle sprain last year, and then he missed a
Didn't
lot of
even notice
time.
it though. He was still like throwing it amazing throw. Just
So
an insane
hopefully
quarterback.
he has been healthy this offseason, which I think could also be pretty significant for them, having like a full healthy offseason and hopefully continued health. All right, the defense, so I left them out of my top 10 defense. I don't think I haven't seen or heard anyone having them, even though last year they radically outperformed many people's expectations, including my own. Ended up finishing 6th against the pass, which is crazy, 17th against the run. So there are some changes, notably Joey Bosa, who was, of course, injured for much last year, is gone. Poona Ford is gone. Cornerback room, Christian Fulton is gone. Let's start with Poona, who is the Geno Smith of defensive tackles. So he had played the most snaps of any defensive tackle last year, led the group in run stops, unsurprisingly. He kind of bet on himself with a 1-year deal and then leveraged that into joining the Rams. I am worried about the run defense sustaining. Even last year, they were slightly below average, but they were largely able to contain explosives. They tackled really well behind him. Diane Henley's an absolute superstar. We'll get to him in a second. But this defense played with the 4th highest light box rate in football under Jesse Minter. Can they continue to do that with Deshaun Hand, Tyler Tart? They drafted Jamari Caldwell. Or are you worried about this defense getting run on?
I'm definitely worried about it. I think this defense last year, especially, was the defense that Brandon Staley had imagined. Like, we're going to give up 4 yards rushing, but we're not going to give up 14, and we're not going to give up explosive run plays, and we're going to get you in third and long, and then you're going to struggle in third and long, because every passing game does. I think they have to be better on first down this year. I think when you look at the splits, it was a little lopsided towards later downs than early downs. And I'm concerned about that because good quarterbacks tore this defense up. Like, if you take out all the games, you could say the same things you said about Denver's defense having an easy schedule, about the Chargers defense. But if you look at the games with not even just like the great quarterbacks on their schedule, but like quarterbacks that we would consider top 16, they allowed 0.2 EPA per dropback against them. And on late downs, they gave up 0.31 EPA, which is basically an MVP season, against guys like Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray. Obviously, Joe Burrow was in there, Patrick Mahomes was in there. But this, I think, was a defense that can be exploited by good offenses. And it kind of reminds me of the Bills' defenses over the last couple of years, where against the dregs of the AFC East, they're going to look great and they're going to get after the passer, they're going to force turnovers. But against the Patrick Mahomeses and the Joe Burrows, they're going to get diced up. And the other part of that is they rushed 5 a lot, and that could be on early downs, it could be on late downs, but they were a team that really thrived when they rushed 5, but when they rushed 4 and they weren't adding extra bodies to the rush or the run defense, they got exposed a little bit. And I think there's a limit, an expiration date when you are getting by on defense with solid scheme. You need talent, and I think especially along the defensive line, that's where they're lacking talent the most. And I think that's where their problems last year, which I think they were hid because you played a bad schedule and that you got good results. But I think we could see some of those holes start to pop up this year.
Yeah, they were a really well coached defense with good players and some really solid young players, but they didn't have stars, I think is how I would put it. And I think that's kind of what you're describing, which is against these big quarterback stuff, and you need stars. Maybe Diane Hemley could become a star. Certainly looks like it. The young corners were great last year. Derwin James, I guess, would probably be their biggest star at this point, and I think that he definitely returned to form, and you really felt like some symbiosis between him and Jesse Minter in terms of how he was used. But if your star is your like hybrid safety nickel, I mean, it doesn't. I do worry about not the absence of a lockdown corner or a pass rusher.
Especially when you have to blitz him to get the most out of him. You don't have to
Right.
blitz him, but he's a very effective blitzer. I think he led the NFL in sacks on 5-man rushes, which just tells you how good he is when you get him in the right matchup with the right pass blocker. But that does take away from coverage. And I think that's when it shows up is against the good
Yeah.
quarterbacks, especially the teams they're afraid to blitz. Because if you look at some of these games against Mahomes and Burrow, they were kind of afraid to send that fifth guy, and then their defense got exposed. So I think the secondary is good. Like guys like Tarheeb still certainly took advantage of the opportunities they were given, but I do
Cam Hart.
wonder if they weren't given that extra half second because the
Mm,
pass rush was getting
Minter,
home. How do
yeah.
they look?
Yeah. Yeah, they played a lot of dime. James also had to play like, he played some nickel because they don't really have a solid I guess still could play inside, but then your problem is you're just creating they're not deep in the secondary, and if you shuffle the deck a little bit, you're just creating new problems. Like if you played your names at the nickel, you're creating a problem at safety. If you have still inside, well, who's playing opposite Cam Hart? It's just kind of there's good players and there's good young players, but there's not enough maybe, or there's and the edge rush just isn't. I mean, Khalil Mack's 34 years old. Tui Pelotu just hasn't really taken. He's always been the perpetual like this guy's going to take the leap this year, and he just hasn't quite taken the leap. They drafted Kyle Kennard, who was very productive in South Carolina. See if they get anything out of him. It just feels like a defense. I talked about this. I compared them to the Packers when I did my top 10 defenses, and I ended up getting an edge to the Packers because I felt like they just had more studs.
Yeah.
Um, but they are similar to me in that they're defenses that kind of played over their talent level in some ways. And the Chargers defense is the one where I look at them and I think, I could see them taking a little. I think they're still going to be good. I certainly would. I'd probably put them in the 10 to 15 range this year. They're obviously very well coached. Jesse Minter obviously has the goods, right? I just don't think there's enough talent here for me to put them in the top 10.
Yeah, that's why I made the Bills comp. I think they're going to be good. You look at the regular season as the totality of it all, and I think they're going to be a top half of the league defense. But when they go against good teams, I just think they're going to get exposed a little bit. That's what happens when you don't have the talent. And I agree, their young talent is promising, so they could take a step forward and kind of bridge that gap. And if that happens, then they could very well be a top 10 defense again. But I think they were another defense that really benefited from a ball control offense as well because they just didn't turn the ball over at all.
Well, and I think that's going to continue. So I think,
Yeah.
again, to go back to complementary football, wow, this team was 26 in pressure rate when they didn't blitz, by the way. That's bad. Yeah, I think, if the run defense remains solid, I think losing Ford is big. Then they're going to be put in situations where they can get after the quarterback and they'll be able to blitz, right? So situationally, if the offense is good, especially if the offense is better at running the football this year, which will help them stay on the field even longer, you could see the defense profiting from that. Still playoff team to me, right? Like that's what makes this tricky because I think the way I would sum it up for the Chargers is they're still a playoff team. I obviously we haven't even talked. Jim Harbaugh's obviously still got it, but when I think about them hitting their high-end case, much depends on some speculation. Can they get more pass rush out of a young guy? Can the young corners hold up? Can whether it's Amarian Hampton or Trey Harris, can rookies be huge contributors? You know,
Can Khalil
that
Mack do what he did last year, which I think is a big question mark as he gets older? Like,
all right. Ranking these teams is difficult. I went first last time. I'm going to make you go first this time. Because so we're doing this is how we think it'll shake out the AFC West.
all right, I'm gonna take the Chiefs, the boring pick to finish at the top of the division. I feel like if you would have asked me before we did this pod, I would have said Los Angeles in second, but I think we've talked me into putting Denver second, and then I'll go Los Angeles third, Las Vegas fourth. As for what I want to happen, like what would be the most fun, I think Las Vegas being second would lead to the most exciting season.
I have the same ranking as you, which I think shouldn't be surprising to anyone who's talking to me heard me talk about the Broncos defense this year. I'm just so high on them. I think they're clearly the best defense in the division, arguably the best defense in the NFL. If the offense is merely above average, which is I think they will be, this team is pretty solid. Is it enough to challenge the Chiefs? I mean, I'm still optimistic about the Chiefs offense, as I've said, and I think they're going to be able to play a pretty similar brand of football to what we saw last year. Chargers offense, I think, takes a step forward. Defense, I think, takes a step back, which has them about the same. Raiders, very exciting offense, but just too many holes on that defense for me to vault them over the rest of the teams.
And I think the Chiefs just match up well with all of these teams. Like the Chargers have a good defense and a good offense, but I think the Chiefs defense matches up so well with their defense that game's always going to be low scoring, and you just expect Pat Mahomes to make the plays in the end. And then the same is true for Denver. If you have to blitz Pat Mahomes, it's going to be a bad
Denver
day.
doesn't have to, though. That's why I think those games could be a little bit dicey, because Denver doesn't. They get pressure with Fuller. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I do think the Chiefs' defense matches up well with how Denver wants to operate on offense. So those games are going to be low scoring as well.
All right, Steven, where can folks find your work this NFL season?
You can find me on The Ringer. I'm going to be on The Ringer NFL show. Quarterback rankings come out a week before the season, so I still have 3 weeks of peace of mind before that just ruins my psyche for the next 4 months.
Have you thought about how high you're going to rank Geno this year?
Yeah, he's going to be top 10. Already called it.
I forgot where he landed on I think maybe just outside the top 10 on the quarterback draft pod. But we'll see. If the Raiders offense is anything like we think it could be, that could end up being a good early call for Geno Nation. All right. That has been the AFC West. We'll be back next week with the NFC South with John Ledyard. If you like television, go check out my TV pod with David Dennis Jr. We are doing Perfect Match, and then we are doing the new Aliens show, the Noah Hawley show. Are you an Aliens guy at all?
I'm not. I've seen the movies, but I'm not going to check out the series probably.
Hey,
I will watch Perfect Match, though. You got me there.
Thank you, as always, to everyone at Omaha Productions who works on this show. Kirsten Sebecki, Anthony Jimenez, Owen Saylor, Jack Foster, Tucker Tashin. If you guys missed a live show in Seattle, by the way, and you somehow are listening to this, we put it out earlier this week. So go check that out in audio or YouTube. All right. See you guys next week.